7 Democratic candidates made their cases to Americans at last night's debate in Los Angeles. But there's a new generation of voters to keep in mind coming up in 2020. Millions of Americans, known as Generation Z, will be able to vote for the first time next year. A new report from Axios dives into this specific demographic and explains how those born after 1996 could have a major impact on 2020. Stef Kight is the author of that article, and she joins me now. She's a reporter for Axios. So, Stef, are there any sort of firsts when it comes to the 2020 election with this new generation's voting power?
Yeah, there are a few of interesting firsts that really characterize this new generation and these first-time voters who, for the first time will be old enough to vote for a president. And one of them is, for the first time, there will be voters who were born after 9/11, this moment that has really changed the U.S. and changed the world and has been a really important point of reflection and has been influential in how we view national security among a host of other issues. And for the first time, we will actually have people who are old enough to vote who were not born when that catastrophe happened in New York. And we will also, for the first time, Gen Z will surpass the silent generation as their share of the electorate. So there will be more Gen Z voters than there are silent generation voters, which of course is significant because the younger generations tend to be much more progressive than the older generations.
And who's the silent generation?
The silent generation is the generation older than the boomers, so the oldest generation still alive today. And then we'll also have more Hispanic voters than any other minority group for the first time in 2020.
So speaking of that Hispanic demographic, immigration, I'm curious, how does that shape this particular set of voters?
Especially when you look at Generation Z, they're actually more likely to be members of an immigrant family than even millennials were. And millennials were, of course, seen as this super diverse generation. And actually, millennials were slightly more likely to be immigrants themselves. And with Generation Z, they're much more likely to have parents who were immigrants. But they're not immigrants themselves, which could actually help their power at the polls because there are fewer of them who would be non-citizens and not qualified to vote, which is a significant difference between Generation Z and millennials.
So you were talking a little bit about the demographic shift for this country with this particular sector. Tell us a little bit more about what this could mean for their political affiliation, particularly for voting trends in the country.
Absolutely. And one thing that we've seen a lot and Axios has reported on a lot is that these younger generations do tend to be much more progressive than the older generations. And while, of course, they're still sort of figuring out where they stand politically and some of those ideas and preferences could change, overall, especially when we're looking at millennials who are a little bit older, they're really sticking with the Democratic Party. But the one key thing that Democrats will have to work on if they're going to actually take advantage of this movement among younger generations is to actually get them to the polls. So while young people tend to be much more progressive and much more supportive of the Democratic Party, they're also much less likely to actually show up on Election Day and cast a vote.
How do you think political parties are now targeting these new voters?
You can really see how campaigns in particular are targeting these younger demographics by the way that they're using Facebook. Facebook has really changed the game when it comes to targeting ads. It's much cheaper than television ads, and it also enables campaigns to really target specific groups very easily. And so Bernie Sanders, for example, and Michael Bloomberg have spent the largest share of their Facebook dollars on this youngest demographic, the 18 to 24 age group that will be voting for the first time or early on in their voting careers.
Could these younger voters reshuffle the swing state map, and if so, how?
Absolutely. I think if we look at 2016 and we look at how close so many states were, how close the race was in this country, any little change, any little movement really can make the difference. If you look at states where swing states where it was just a couple thousand votes difference, a new generation of voters could make that difference. And again, it could be something that could be very good for Democrats, but they have to get those young people to the polls. They have to show them that they understand what young people care about today and that they're willing to do something about it. And if they can do that, it could be an important part of the electorate for Democrats in 2020.
Stef Kight, a fascinating look at Generation Z. Thank you very much.
Thank you.